Hello, everyone. My name is Richard McLean. I'm the political director for the Clark County Republican Party. On Monday of this week, the Democrats in the legislature put forward Assembly Bill 286. 286 is a overreaching gun control measure, which we fully intend to oppose. We've spent a couple days doing both legal and legislative research on the topic of that bill, as well as working with legislators and putting out information. This morning, early Wednesday morning, there was a hearing in the Assembly, in the Judiciary, and we had more than 1,000 people sign up and express opposition to the bill. Opposition was 9-1 against this bill, and we will continue to work on it. This afternoon, we had a conversation with Steve Crescendi. Steve Crescendi is highly knowledgeable on gun legislation. He's also in the industry and is the owner and proprietor of a business in the industry. I'd like to play that interview for you. And also urge you to go to clarkgop.org. At the top of our homepage, there is a link with regard to AB 286. You should also have received an email from us regarding AB 286, including the email addresses of the legislators on that particular committee. I urge you to follow the directions in that email and to email those legislators in opposition to this bill. And there's also going to be a link on our webpage, as well as in that email, for you to go read the actual language of the bill. I also encourage you to watch the video of the hearing and the testimony today. It included statements from the public, both in support of and in opposition to this bill, as well as public comments and other useful information. If you are a Second Amendment advocate, really a constitutional advocate in any way, should be of interest to you. I think if you notice that we haven't put out a ton of information about different bills, we've been relying on the information that's been put out by the state party and by other agencies to this point. This one went out with specific notice because we believe it's that critical. There's also another bill that came out today, Assembly Bill 321. 321 makes the mail-in ballot and ballot harvesting practices that have been put in place under the emergency orders, it makes those permanent. And so we'll be putting information out in the next couple of days on that as well. Again, you should have received an email already with the proper links, and we will put out more information about where to testify and how to show opposition to that bill as well. I hope you find the following interview with Mr. Crescendi. Also, we included Ed Gonzalez on that interview. Ed Gonzalez is legislative affairs for the Clark County Republican Party. I hope you find the interview with the two gentlemen useful. If you have any questions, please use clarkgop.org and the Contact Us link and send me your comments, questions, concerns. If you feel that you can add something to this debate, or if there's anything that you need from us, that's the link to use. I appreciate your time, any energy or effort that you could put out on this, and I look forward to your comments. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today with Steve Crescendi, owner of Briarhawk Firearms and Ammunition, also concerned citizen regarding AB 286. We've been working for just over 24 hours on this, a bill that dropped in last possible minute. Can't help but notice they dropped it after 50 some other bills dropped over the weekend. I think this was something we were meant to lose in the shuffle. We've also got with us Ed Gonzalez. Ed is our legislative affairs representative for Clark County Republican Party. Mr. Crescendi, so AB 286, walk us through your concerns and how you feel about the bill.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll kind of call it the elephant in the room is you look at two completely opposing pieces of legislature basically shoved into the same bill, right? So you have one piece, which they keep fondly calling the ghost gun, which is just a term that's gotten abused from California. And the second piece is the portion where they're talking about private property and having to basically put more teeth into what they call a toothless trespass law. So if you kind of unpack those two pieces, they're completely unrelated. So that's one of the biggest challenges right there. Just on the surface level, and then we can start digging into each. If you want to pick which one first, we can go down that path.
Okay, yeah. So the ghost gun, I think, is stuck in there for, frankly, it has a sensational effect.
Mhm.
It sounds scary, right? Who's not afraid of ghosts, right? You got this, it's kind of ridiculous. There was a gentleman that testified today during public comments, or no, I'm sorry, he testified, I believe, in opposition to the bill. And he mentioned that this is a tradition, making guns and people doing so in the privacy of their own home and business has been, as long as they're not selling the thing, it's part of our 200-year tradition as a country. And it seems to me like they've crammed this in because the idea of people just making these mass amounts of guns, it's sort of, it's a fabrication within the narrative of the left. And frankly, I don't understand either how it is linked to this. The other concern I had is the constant reference of October 1, the
Mhm.
obvious attempt to pull, and there's no part, I want to make perfectly clear, and this is me speaking as political director for the county party, there's no part of this bill that would have prevented October 1 from happening. I see it making absolutely no difference in terms of a mass shooting, except that we'd have no ability to defend ourselves if we find ourselves involved in an attack of that type. But as far as the bill itself, it seems fairly convoluted, even when you separate out those two issues.
It is. It is. So let's kind of talk about their sensationalized ghost gun piece, right? And what you were mentioning earlier was the fact that but there's hobbyists out there now today that actually take what's called the 80%, right? And the 80% means it's not a functioning firearm, right? That's what the ATF has defined as not functioning. So therefore, they could take this part and screw it up, and it doesn't become a gun, right? It does have the intent to become a gun, and that's what they're kind of going after in this particular bill. But at the same time, if you look back, right, the Revolutionary War, there was no Smith and Wesson, there was no Remington. Those companies didn't exist yet, and so men who actually helped, free ourselves from basically the tyranny of the English Empire, they're the ones who built their own firearms. So yes, this is rooted deeply in the heritage of our country, and there are lots of people that actually build a firearm itself and actually work and function with it. Whether it's a 80% lower, right? Whether it's a receiver or lower, if you want to build, say, for example, a Glock or an AR platform type of firearm. And for clarification, and I heard this on the call, AR does not stand for assault rifle, so it just happens to be a model designation. But the fact that people actually want to be able to build this, teach their child or their offspring that, hey, look, this is how engineering works, right? There's a lot of aspects that go into this, and understanding and being a person that's actually built firearms myself. The kind of common thing we actually tell customers is when we have customer walks into the store, they say, "Oh, I want to build an AR." Okay, do you own an AR yet? They're like, "No." I'm like, "Well, this is what I want you to do. I want you to buy the first one and build the second one, because when you go out to target shoot, if the one you build doesn't work, you're going to be frustrated. So why not have some fun, do some target shooting, go out and be able to have one that's going to be functioning, and then also compare and contrast what works, what doesn't work." And then at the same time, as people, like you said, there's hobbyists out there. There's people that actually like to build the firearms because it gives them something to do.
Yeah, and I think, learn respect for the weapon, right? Learn how to
Mhm.
handle things and do things, and then building one should come more naturally, I would think.
Yep.
There's another aspect to this, and we can cover a little bit of the other testimony that we heard today. There was a woman that came on in opposition, and she said, "This is not for makers. This is not for DIYers." I disagree with that. I'll tell you why.
Mhm.
I don't manufacture weapons of any kind, but I have manufactured electronic devices and other things.
Mhm.
No shortage of government regulation on electronic devices and things
Mhm.
such as what I built. But there are protections for innovators. There are protections for people to be able to build. I build pieces of things, send them back to the inventors, maybe send them on to another person who specializes in some part of that process. I would
Mhm.
imagine it's not different with firearms. Why couldn't I build a lower, which may be intended to be a weapon by somebody, not so much by me, send it to you, and you start building, the components that maybe you specialize in. And I think anything that hampers or hinders innovation is not American, frankly. And I'm going to be the first one to use that phrase today. I don't think I've heard anyone else do that. But this is not American. This is a thing where we're basically being, engaging in an argument. And there was a gentleman that used the word several times. I liked his testimony very much. He said the left is being disingenuous, and I agree with that. Any argument where the intent is incrementally to move you to something that is not stated in the argument is not an intellectually honest argument. The left wants us to have no guns of any kind anywhere, and that is their goal. They've denied over and over again throughout this last 2 election seasons that this was their intent, and yet here we are again having a conversation where not only did they implement something that is an egregious violation in many people's view of our constitutional protections, they're very sloppy at it. I mean, there's enforcement issues with this law. There's many other things. I want to bring Ed Gonzalez in for this. And Ed, I've got 2 questions for you. One, obviously there's no single subject rule here. So we're not, we've got 2 very different things involved in the same bill, but then there's also quite a few contradictions and as we mentioned, it's convoluted. What's your feeling in terms of the complexity of the thing, the difficulties you might have in enforcement or whatever else you might have to add to the conversation?
Well, I think there's, like you said, there's 2 different bills about this. When you talk about the 80% guns, one of the things that Metro had mentioned is that they haven't really seen it. They've seen a small uptick on this, but they don't know how significant it is, at least when it comes to crime. And so that was one aspect of it. So this has more of a national feel of what's going on and trying to take the national issues and jam them into Nevada. And then the second thing, I think, I'm a renter. And one of the things that was brought up in opposition testimony too was, it was property owners. So if I have a gun, or if Steve came up and visited me and he has it in his car, if he doesn't have written permission and the property manager wants it to be essentially a gun-free area, now suddenly he's committed a gross misdemeanor the first time. And, I've been here since 2012 and I've pretty much rented, whether it's an apartment or in a house. And so there's areas like that. And then the broad scope of things too, what's a covered premise? A gaming establishment, people think casinos, but that would also include like convenience stores. There's a Circle K that has a by our house. There's also things too, if you think about the definition, especially with the amendment, which, this happened pretty quickly. Bill introduced Monday late morning, hearing announced Tuesday morning for Wednesday, an amendment dropped in late last night for members. And we looked at it this morning. It's hard to really digest it, but as you look through it, one of the areas is sort of that premise of opening it up to gaming establishment and what's included within it. It leads to things like supermarkets too. Is that included as well? Because it's only part of it. So there's a lot of limitations of where you can even carry. And a lot of these people are, they're CCW holders. So they've been trained on the gun. They have to go through a special process, and it's now hit and miss on where to be. And it's almost this incidental. Even the defense attorneys have brought it up. I think it was John Piro from Carr County Public Defenders who said there's some problems in this bill too. And he even spoke in opposition.
Right. And I think we spoke to legal counsel about it. And the 2 concerns that were raised for us, one was with regard to, it's not if you walk into a building, it's if you set foot on the property. So let's say Raider Stadium was the example that the attorney used with me. He said, so if they have a sign on the front of the building, how do you know before you set foot on the property that sign is even there? In many cases, how do you get the owner's permission before you set foot on the property? And so his assessment as an attorney, and as an attorney well-versed in these areas, he said this basically makes it impossible, if not nearly impossible, if not completely impossible, to carry a firearm, which is an infringement on our rights. Something else that made me really uncomfortable today, and throughout the conversations about bills like this is becoming commonplace, which also makes me uncomfortable, is the comparison of CCW holders to mass shooters. It almost as if they're putting them on the same plane, and that is as offensive as you get in every sense. There's no data driving the decisions to put this thing in place. As I said earlier, there's no line that you can draw between this bill and anything that would have prevented October 1 or any mass shooting. Again, this is a dishonest attempt to reduce the number of guns that are out there, or to make gun owners out to be criminals. Something I mentioned in a conversation yesterday that occurred to me, there are laws in many states and some federal laws that basically make the charge of murder stick if anyone dies in the commission of a felony. So if you happen to be on your 2nd or 3rd offense, depending on how this lays out, and you are now considered a felon because you're carrying this weapon in some way that normally would be charged as at most as a misdemeanor, and somebody dies, even if not at your own hand, are you going to face a murder charge? I think there's a lack of compatibility, not just with common sense, but with common sense laws that are already in place. And I find that to be one of the most disturbing things about this, is it doesn't seem like there's even a compatibility with their own efforts at this point. It's just this haphazard attempt to implement this thing without much regard for existing law. I'll leave that to either of you, whoever wants to speak on that topic.
I'll jump in on this one. So, I understand exactly where you're coming from, and especially the one thing that they're looking at right now is, and I heard it mentioned twice, and I cringed both times that I said it, that they said was basically they lumped CCW holders, like you said, in with criminals, and then they just decided to throw white supremacist in with this.
Right.
And I'm looking at this and going, are we talking some sort of personal grind or an agenda? Or are we talking about an actual problem? And one of the things that I wrote up, and unfortunately didn't get a chance to speak today, was they kept saying, we want to put teeth into the trespass laws. And I'm like thinking, why not bolster up the trespass laws, that if somebody asks you to leave and you don't, then yes, the police can arrest you. Why does it have to involve a firearm, right? Everybody's played video games, or at least a lot of people have played video games. Guess what? A chainsaw, a baseball bat, a crowbar, those things have never been intended to be used as a firearm. But so that means I could walk into the Wynn Casino with a chainsaw, but it's okay, but I can't with a gun. Like it's absolutely absurd of where they're going with this.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think there was a couple comments offered about, and Ed, you can speak to this. We've spoke off camera on this about a possible conflict wherein if I surrender my gun to the person working the front counter at MGM, I may well be violating the law, and that's not something I think any gun owner would be comfortable doing anyway. Ed, you want to talk on that point?
Yeah, that was a concern that was brought up in opposition testimony too. That there's when you temporarily give the gun to somebody, especially there's a process with the background check law. We did the ballot initiative, and there is some concern about that. But I want to bring up something that Assemblyman P.K. O'Neill. He's from Carson City. He's former Nevada Highway Patrol. I mean, I want to say it's 25, 30 years he was involved in it. And he asked the question to MGM, and it goes back to the trespass law. And it seemed like exactly what was said is that, well, if we have this situation, and I think we can agree that a business does have a right not to have somebody who has a gun to come onto the property. It's trespassing. This seems to be a stronger form of it and more convoluted. But he was basically alluding to that Metro doesn't show up when it's just a trespassing. And I think this goes back to what many conservatives say. If you add stronger laws to something that's not being enforced, does it really make it more enforceable? Will Metro sit there and come? I thought it was surprising to hear that testimony, especially when we're talking about the strip, where that's just an enforcement mechanism. And so it concerns me, because if you do that on that situation where it's essentially trespassing, first time's a misdemeanor, second one's a gross misdemeanor, third one's a felony. And the felony comes with a whole host of things. I mean, you'll lose your Second Amendment rights, and you'll lose actually some other stuff as well, besides possibly, now it's a Class C felony. So what that means is that most likely you're not getting jail time. But we're talking, you hear a lot of stuff from the Democrats about criminal justice reform, and I don't think we want to start processing people for essentially, which is a trespassing charge, and throwing them in jail.
Well, and I don't want to wander off the topic, but it's worth pointing out that in the last few sessions, Democrats are known for lessening sentencing and basically creating what every known study in the universe says will increase recidivism. But when it comes to law-abiding gun owners, CCW carriers who frankly have been through background checks, who've been through training, they've jumped through every hoop they've been asked to, and I think most are happy to do it. I don't necessarily speak for gun owners, but I'll say as a gun owner myself, I like the idea that we're doing our own due diligence. I think gun safety, if you look at, we talked about this earlier as well, the NRA is the preeminent gun safety organization in the world, and that gets left out of every conversation. If you look at how they train families and what they've done with families, I think Nevada gun owners as well, I think there's a ton of work done in the interest of the public, in the interest not just of gun owners, but the public at large. What we saw today, though, was, there's a woman who testifies that she was frightened because a woman walked past her with a gun on her head. And she's very careful to describe it as black gun. And it's, very scary. And, there's a lot of emotion injected over October 1. There's a lot of emotion injected over, just this whole topic. And I feel as though there's almost an irrational attachment of a sensational type argument. And there's no data to support that this gun law would actually do any good. Frankly, as Nevadans, as Americans, we deserve better than that. If you're going to pass something, if you're going to pass any kind of a restriction, it's got to map to some form of success. It's got to map to some result. And I don't see that with this. Stephen, do you think, am I accurate in that? Do you see any positive in this law whatsoever?
No, not at all. And I actually wanted to add on to a couple of things you just mentioned too, and same thing with Ed. So the woman that testified and said that she saw the woman with a gun and she started going into this panic attack. I remember an exact same scenario. I was in Winco on North Decatur, and I walked in there and I saw a woman pushing the cart with her kid in the cart and a gun on her hip. I walked up to her. I gave her my card. I said, if you never ever need training, you come to me. I'll be more than happy to train you. I'm very proud that you're here protecting yourself and you're protecting your child, right? That's what the Second Amendment is for. It's not for
Right.
hunting. It's not for going for deer. It's about protecting you, your family, and your country, right? And that's what a lot of these people are forgetting about. And then to add on to what Ed was actually saying about how it's, first one's misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor, felony. Okay, so it's felony, no jail time. And I can guarantee this is what's going to come out. Oh, well, it's not going to be any jail time, so you don't have anything to worry about. That doesn't matter. And not that I'm trying to gaslight anybody right now, but saying is, if you get a felony, no jail time, that's still a felony that you lose your Second Amendment right. That's basically an end run for gun confiscation, right?
Mhm.
That's all it is.
And if it doesn't come to that point, you're still scaring people to the point that they might not carry when they would ordinarily.
Yep.
I mean, pushing people out of things through fear isn't the American way either.
No.
So, and then don't forget that felonies and charges can be stacked on one another, and no jail time felony could be an aggravated circumstance under another law or some other thing. And let's not forget, coming into this, we're not dealing with an adversary who's being intellectually honest. So they're going to slide this thing, and the more you enable. I mean, I don't know, and Ed, maybe you can speak to this. I don't know the legislative process for this, but moving it from a no jail time to a jail time might be easier than passing the initial thing. And it's the incrementalism of this that makes me as uncomfortable as any of it.
Yeah, and just to let you know, so Class C is the no jail time. I think it's Class D that's sort of the option for the judge, and then Class C is where you have to do it. So there's different classes onto it. I think what also caught my attention on this as well is that I know with Steven is that he's got the gun shop and it's in a strip mall. If for some reason like he doesn't have permission from the property owner, if we decided, hey, we're going to make this a gun-free area, does it literally mean when I come out of his shop that suddenly I'm violating the law because I don't have written permission? Now I'm assuming because he's renting to them in a strip mall, that's not going to be the case, but it'll leave so much, troublesome language in here. And remember, this thing was rushed, and I've been involved in the legislative process. It's rushed for a reason. I mean, and so you get it Monday and it does Tuesday. There's a reason why they're rushing this. And so I think that's the most disturbing, just in general, for good lawmaking, is that you need to have a process, be able to sit people down. Like no one can process anything. And that's why you saw so many people testifying in opposition. They're trying to figure out what is going on in this bill and even the amendments.
Yeah, and what if one of the establishments in the plaza? So my landlord, of course, is clearly okay with me having a gun shop in my plaza, and not to mention we were the only business still open during the whole pandemic, right? So he's getting his rent at least, but because the governor could not shut us down, because of the law. But at the same time, what if one of the tenants in the plaza was uncomfortable about it and they said no? So they now have right to some of the parking lot according to the way this bill is written. So now you're running into this conflict of what do you do?
Right. And you're talking about a legitimate business selling legal, constitutionally protected product and service.
Correct.
And this is a thing we're putting them in this predicament, which is not acceptable. Back to Ed's point a second ago about this being done for a reason. It's important that anybody watching this, whether you're a Republican, whether you're a Democrat, they're not lying to us on this. They're not deceiving us on this. We know exactly what they're doing. We understand the timing of it. They're deceiving their own people because they're pushing a narrative with less than complete information, trying to pull on emotion and sensationalism. I'm waiting for the conservative Democrats, for the gun respecting Democrats, and frankly for any liberty respecting Democrat to sort of step up and say, listen, if this is worth doing, it's worth doing in the light of day. It's worth having robust, vigorous, and honest debate. And I mean, I would be a whole lot more reassured about the opposition party if they were capable of that. And so, I mean, I'm making it a little more political, a little less about guns for the moment, but this could be any item on their agenda. It's, to me, if not the most, it's certainly one of the most critical items on the agenda. And so I think this is a good place for us to take our stand, make our stand, and make it known to people that we're not going to tolerate this type of dishonesty. There are public servants, whether I'm in their party or not, and there are public servants, whether I voted for them or not. And frankly, I'd like to see us unite on this topic. I mean, again, this is about liberty. And listen, this is an emotional issue for some people. I'm not all that emotional about it, except for the fact that I think we're being lied to. And I'd like to see at least the deception stop. And so we're going to post a link on our homepage, clarkgop.org, specific to AB286. We've got another bill coming down today that has to do with making mail-in ballots permanent. I'll put a link there as well. And I'd like to see people continue to send information to the legislators. Also, if the link is still operational, to add their comment in opposition to this to the bill itself. We'll provide that as well. I want to thank you both for coming on and for talking about this. Keep fighting the fight. I really appreciate your time and energy on the topic. If there's anything that we can do here at the Clark County Party, of course, we're available to you. And I just want to say thanks again for your time and for your effort.
Thanks for having me.